Carl Jung never viewed empaths as fragile beings meant to suffer. He saw them as dormant giants, individuals with a power so strong that society had to convince them it was a flaw. And when that giant finally stirs, when the empath stops absorbing everyone else's pain and begins using their real power, something unsettling occurs. Because what happens when they stop soaking up pain and start reflecting it back? Jung spent decades documenting a repeating pattern that haunted his clinical work. Patient after patient walked into his office carrying the same unseen injury. These weren't ordinary cases of depression or anxiety. These were people who had been slowly drained by those closest to them. What fascinated Jung wasn't their suffering itself. It was what happened when they stopped suffering quietly. These empaths had lived their entire lives as emotional shock absorbers. Every family has one. The person who feels too deeply, who notices everything, who carries everyone's burdens without protest. Jung called them the stabilizers of broken systems. They kept alcoholic parents functioning. They made narcissistic siblings feel significant. They erased their own needs so thoroughly that they forgot those needs ever existed. The cost of this role was invisible yet catastrophic. Endless exhaustion no amount of rest could fix. A lingering sense of being unseen even while surrounded by people who depended on them. And the suffocating identity of being the good one, the dependable one, the one who never makes trouble because they're busy solving everyone else's. But here's what Jung uncovered that changes everything. This wasn't personality. This wasn't some noble trait empaths were born with. This kindness, this constant giving, this emotional openness was a survival mechanism. A deliberate adaptation to environments where being selfish meant abandonment, where having boundaries meant being called heartless, where expressing needs meant inviting rage or rejection. The empath learned early that their worth was conditional. Keep helping and you stay loved. Stop giving and you become replaceable. So they gave until nothing remained. Jung understood this wasn't virtue. It was trauma disguised as compassion. What makes this survival style so insidious is how early it begins. Jung traced these patterns back to childhood in nearly every case. The empath child learns to read a room before they can read words. They become experts at identifying dad's mood from the sound of his steps on the stairs. They learn to sense mom's emotional weather from the tone of her hello on the phone. They develop psychological radar as a safety tool. This hypervigilance becomes their normal. While other children learn to play and explore, the empath child learns to manage. They're managing their parents' marriage by being perfect so there's nothing to argue about. They're managing their siblings' emotions by being the constant mediator. They're managing their own needs by pretending those needs don't matter. Jung documented how this pattern deepens with time. The empath becomes so practiced at reading others that they lose track of their own inner world. They can describe exactly what everyone else in the room is feeling, yet have no idea what they themselves feel. They've outsourced their entire emotional identity to the task of regulating the people around them. Every empath Jung treated could pinpoint the exact moment everything changed. Not a slow shift, not a gradual awakening. An unmistakable moment of betrayal so severe it shattered the illusion they'd held their whole life. Usually, it was someone they trusted fully. A partner secretly cheating for years. A parent who weaponized their vulnerability. A friend who turned their deepest secrets into gossip. The details differed, but the pattern was the same. The person the empath protected most fiercely became the one who hurt them most deeply. Jung called this the activation event. The moment when the empath's lifelong pattern recognition skills, which had always operated quietly in the background, suddenly became impossible to ignore. They had known something was wrong. They had noticed the clues. They had sensed the lies, but they had trained themselves to dismiss their own perceptions. Because acknowledging the truth meant admitting they'd been deceived. The betrayal forced them to confront what they had refused to see, and once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. This is where Jung's concept of shadow integration becomes essential. The empath realized something that broke them and rebuilt them at the same time. Their tolerance hadn't protected anyone. It had enabled abuse. Their kindness hadn't healed damaged people. It had allowed damaged people to escape consequences. What Jung witnessed repeatedly was a precise sequence of realizations empaths experienced during activation. First came the shock of betrayal. Then came the mental replay. The empath's mind would rewind through years of interactions, and suddenly patterns once invisible became clear. The moments their worries were dismissed as paranoia were actually the times they were seeing accurately and being gaslit. The moments they were told they were too sensitive were times when their clarity threatened someone's lies. The empath watches their life like a film where the plot finally makes sense. They see how they were conditioned to doubt themselves. They notice when they muted their truth to maintain harmony. They understand harshly how their gift of perception was weaponized against them and turned into a source of shame. The narrative shifted. This wasn't about being a victim anymore. It was about waking up from a lifetime of psychological manipulation. The empath had been asleep, and now they were frighteningly awake. Jung documented something most people completely misunderstand about empaths. Their ability to read others, sense emotions, and detect hidden dynamics isn't mystical or supernatural. It's data processing. Highly advanced pattern recognition operating at a level most people never develop. Empaths register micro-expressions that flicker across faces in fractions of a second. They track subtle tonal shifts that reveal concealed emotions. They feel the energetic disturbance when someone enters a room carrying anger they're pretending not to have. They've been absorbing this data their entire lives, constructing psychological profiles of everyone around them without fully realizing what they were doing. The difference after activation is that they finally trust their perceptions. Before the snap, an empath might enter a room and sense that two people who claimed to be friends actually disliked each other, but they dismiss the feeling as paranoia or judgment. After activation, they trust it, and they're almost never wrong. Jung described a case that perfectly demonstrates this ability. An activated empath entered a family gathering where everyone was performing normalcy. Pleasant chatter, polite smiles, the rehearsed illusion of functional relationships. Within 10 minutes, she could identify which marriages were collapsing, who was hiding an addiction, who was stealing money, and who was preparing to leave the family entirely. She didn't confront anyone. She didn't create conflict. She simply observed. And her presence made the liars profoundly uneasy, because some part of them recognized they'd been seen, not suspected. The activated empath had become a human lie detector in a room full of people whose bonds depended on maintaining deception. Jung noticed something else in his sessions with activated empaths. They developed what he called perceptual layers. They could track simultaneously what someone said, what their body language communicated, what emotions leaked through their controlled facade, and what deeper psychological patterns shaped the entire interaction. Most people can barely follow the surface conversation. The activated empath is reading 4 layers deep while appearing simply attentive. This multi-layered perception is what makes activated empaths seem almost supernatural to others. They respond to the unspoken subtext while everyone else is still interpreting the surface message. They address the real issue before anyone names it. They identify the dynamic everyone else is pretending isn't there. This is why activated empaths become threatening. Not to healthy people, not to genuine relationships. They become dangerous to manipulators, narcissists, and anyone whose influence relies on keeping empaths confused about reality. The manipulator's entire strategy collapses. Gaslighting fails because the empath now trusts their own perception and memory fully. Guilt-tripping fails because the empath recognizes the difference between legitimate responsibility and manufactured obligation. Love bombing fails because the empath can distinguish genuine affection from calculated performance. The activated empath stops reacting emotionally and starts responding strategically. This change terrifies people who once controlled them through emotional manipulation. Where manipulators once found someone who absorbed rage and replied with apologies, they now encounter someone who simply reflects the behavior back without absorbing anything. Jung called this the mirror effect. The activated empath becomes a flawless psychological mirror. When someone approaches them with manipulation, the empath doesn't engage with the content of the tactic. They reflect the pattern itself, not with cruelty, not with vengeance, but with precise clarity that exposes the manipulator's methods without losing their own stability. A narcissist tries to invoke guilt. The old empath would have apologized and tried harder. The activated empath identifies the tactic outright. You're attempting to make me responsible for your emotions so you can avoid responsibility for your actions. I won't participate in that dynamic. The manipulation collapses instantly because there's nothing left to manipulate. The empath has removed themselves as a target. Jung observed how this mirror effect creates a remarkable phenomenon within social systems. The activated empath doesn't need to behave aggressively or confrontationally. Their simple refusal to absorb dysfunction forces the entire system to reorganize. Family members who depended on the empath to regulate their emotions are forced to develop regulation of their own. Friends who used the empath as an emotional dumping ground must find healthier outlets. Romantic partners who exploited the empath's tolerance must either improve or find a new target. The activated empath becomes a catalyst for collective evolution simply by holding boundaries. Jung called this the purification effect. When one person stops enabling toxicity, everyone connected to them must either grow or reveal their true nature. Both outcomes serve the empath's highest good. This is the power empaths spent their lives suppressing, not the power to feel deeply. They never stop doing that. The power to act on what they perceive without permission, without approval, without apologizing for clarity. But activation without integration is dangerous. Jung understood that an empath who merely weaponizes their abilities becomes the very thing that once harmed them. The final stage isn't about becoming cold or ruthless. It's about becoming a warrior who chooses when and how to use their power. This is where Jung's idea of individuation becomes vital. The individuated empath has integrated their shadow. They've acknowledged their own capacity for manipulation, cruelty, and selfishness. Not to indulge these traits, but to recognize them as parts of a complete self. This awareness is what allows them to use their power ethically. Music. They understand the difference between nice and kind. Nice is weak. Nice is people-pleasing disguised as virtue. Nice is conflict avoidance that enables harm. Kind is strong. Kind is choosing gentleness from a place of strength rather than from a place of fear. Kindness is intentional, boundaried, and sustainable. Jung wrote about patients who reached this stage of integration. They became people who were deeply gentle with those who deserved gentleness and completely immovable with those who didn't. They could offer compassion without self-erasure. They could recognize manipulation without becoming manipulative. They carried the discernment to know when to extend mercy and when to enforce consequences. The integration phase requires empaths to face uncomfortable truths about themselves. They must acknowledge the times they weaponized their empathy. The moments when they played the martyr to gain sympathy. The periods they stayed in toxic environments not because they couldn't leave, but because the role of the victim gave them an identity they weren't yet willing to surrender. Jung insisted on this shadow work because he recognized that unintegrated empaths could become the most skilled manipulators. They understand human psychology well enough to exploit it. They read people accurately enough to know exactly which buttons to press. Without ethical integration, an activated empath could create devastating damage. But once the shadow work is complete, something extraordinary emerges. The individuated empath is fully capable of harm, but consciously chooses peace. Not out of fear of conflict, not out of a need to appear good, but because they've confronted their own destructive potential and intentionally chosen to build instead. That choice, born from genuine power rather than learned helplessness, is what makes them psychologically unshakable. Now we reach what Jung described as the final transformation. The activated and integrated empath reaches a psychological state most music people never attain. They no longer depend on external validation, not because they've become arrogant or withdrawn, but because they have developed such profound trust in their own perception that others' opinions become irrelevant data points rather than threats to their identity. Consider what this means. Your entire life, you judged your worth by whether others approved of you. You adjusted your behavior to keep people comfortable. You swallowed your truth to avoid being labeled difficult. Music. Every decision ran through the filter of how others would react. The activated empath asks entirely different questions. Is this true? Is this aligned with who I am? Does this support my growth, or does it support someone else's comfort at my expense? They become psychologically invulnerable because there's no external approval they desire enough to betray themselves to get it. Manipulators despise this. Narcissists cannot operate around it. Controllers become powerless in the presence of it, because their influence depended entirely on the empath's need for acceptance. Remove that need and the entire structure of power collapses. Jung documented how this shift produces a ripple effect that spreads far beyond the individual empath. When a person becomes truly sovereign, untouchable by manipulation through complete self-trust, they give everyone around them permission to do the same. Other empaths witness what is possible and begin their own activation. Healthy individuals feel safe being genuine because no performance is required. Toxic people either evolve or disappear because their strategies no longer function. The individuated empath becomes what Jung called a bearer of consciousness. They carry a degree of psychological awareness that elevates entire social systems simply through their presence. They don't preach or lecture. They show, through their unwavering loyalty to truth, what humans become when they stop betraying themselves. Jung saw this transformation and recognized something profound. The empath's breaking point was actually the start of their healing. The moment they thought they were collapsing was the moment they were finally aligning. Every relationship that ended, every departure, every closed door removed exactly what needed to be removed so the real work could begin. Your snapping point wasn't a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. The person you were before, the one who absorbed everyone's pain, took responsibility for everyone's emotions, and made yourself small so others could feel big. That version had to disappear so the real you could surface. And the real you is far more powerful than you were ever allowed to imagine. Jung recorded this repeatedly. The empath who finally says enough doesn't turn bitter. They become free. They don't lose their capacity to love. They gain the capacity to love from wholeness rather than woundedness. They don't grow cold. They become warm in a way that's sustainable because they're finally giving from overflow instead of depletion. This transformation isn't always welcomed. Jung noted that empaths often meet intense resistance during activation. Family members accuse them of changing, of becoming selfish, of acting superior. What these critics are truly saying is that the empath has stopped enabling their dysfunction, and they resent losing their emotional crutch. Friends who relied on one-sided emotional support suddenly find the empath unavailable for endless crisis caretaking. Romantic partners who depended on the empath's tolerance for harmful behavior find themselves facing real consequences for the first time. Accusations begin. You've become cold. You've lost your compassion. You're not the person I knew. And the activated empath's reply holds quiet power. You're right. I'm not the person you knew. That person was performing a role that nearly destroyed me. This is who I actually am. And if you can't love the real me, you never loved me at all. You loved what I provided. This is your inheritance. This power you've suppressed your whole life because others said it was too intense. Because you learned that seeing clearly made people uncomfortable. Because early on your sensitivity was weaponized against you instead of honored as the gift it truly is. You were never broken. You were never too sensitive. You were never the problem. You were a giant taught to believe you were small. And everyone who benefited from your smallness will resist your growth. Let them. Their resistance is the proof that you're heading in the right direction. The activated empath doesn't need to declare their transformation. Others sense it. The same people who once felt comfortable unloading their emotional chaos on you now feel uneasy in your presence. Not because you've become harsh, but because you've become clear. And clarity is frightening to people whose survival relies on keeping you confused. Jung's final insight about activated empaths was this. They become those who shift entire systems simply by refusing to take part in dysfunction. One person who stops absorbing toxicity forces everyone around them to either evolve or expose themselves. Families reorganize, friendships adjust, workplaces change, not through conflict, but through the steady, unwavering presence of someone who will no longer betray themselves for others' comfort. You're not turning on a power you never had. You're removing the blocks to a power that's been there all along. Every time you were told you were too sensitive, that was someone trying to convince you your strength was a flaw. Every time you were labeled selfish for having boundaries, that was someone trying to keep access to you without giving back. Every time you were made to feel guilty for your insights, that was someone trying to gaslight you out of trusting the truth you clearly saw. The switch is flipping. You feel it. That's why you're here. That's why this message reached you at this precise moment. You're in the activation stage. And part of you is scared because you're becoming someone the old you wouldn't recognize. Someone who doesn't apologize for existing. Someone who doesn't shrink to ease others. Someone finally able to use the power they've spent a lifetime suppressing. Jung would tell you this. The empath's path isn't from sensitivity to numbness. It's from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. You don't lose your empathy. You gain sovereignty over it. You become not less feeling, but precisely feeling. Not less caring, but sharply discerning about who deserves that care and who has simply exploited your inability to say no. This activation isn't the end of your empathic abilities. It's the start of their proper use. Before activation, your empathy ruled you. After activation, you rule your empathy. You can turn it on when it helps. You can turn it off when it doesn't. You can offer compassion to those who reciprocate and withdraw it from those who take advantage. This selective empathy isn't cruelty. It's wisdom. Jung noted that fully activated empaths develop what he called conscious boundaries. These aren't walls made from fear. They're gates operated from strength. The empath chooses who gets access and who doesn't. They choose when to engage and when to step back. They choose which relationships deserve investment and which deserve ending. This level of autonomy feels unfamiliar at first because empaths spent most of their lives with others controlling the terms of interaction. Other people decided when the empath's energy was available. Other people dictated what requests were acceptable. Other people set the rules and the empath simply complied. Not anymore. The activated empath sets their own terms, and the ones who truly care about them celebrate the shift while the ones who use them push back against it. This is the moment. The giant is awakening. And when empaths finally embrace their power, when they stop hiding and start acting from their truth, they don't just transform their own lives. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.